Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coast Connections. I'm Elizabeth Hines, and today we're going to be talking about decluttering your life from the inside out. Do you have a lot of clutter in your life? Even the word clutter is a very heavy word, and it sort of can make you depressed and anxious. But it's not just physical clutter, it's also relationship clutter, financial clutter, digital clutter. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and we're going to talk about how this happens, how we get these pile-ups in our life. And joining us to do that, we have two gentlemen. Good evening from Island Integrated Counselling. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ian Gartshore, nice to have you back.
I'm glad to be back to see you again.
Thank you, and you're actually the founder of Island Integrated Health, or Counselling, pardon me. And Earl Blacklock, welcome. I understand you came all the way from Yellowknife via Saskatchewan.
Via Saskatchewan, yes. Been here for a little over 2 years.
And you're the executive director.
I am.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So why do we get these pile-ups in our life, and why does clutter cause our emotional space to jam? And Ian, what's sort of one of the causes of clutter in our life? And is clutter necessarily emotional clutter?
It's such a multifaceted question, and I don't think anyone's got the answer. I did some research before coming onto the show, obviously, just so that it would look like I was intelligent and knew what I was talking about. But really, everyone's kind of trying to figure this out. It's so clutter. Well, anybody who has got any amount of things on in their lives are going to find that they clutter things. They put that down, I'm going to deal with that later, and then that later ends up being tomorrow, next week, whatever, and go, I still haven't finished this piece or whatever. Dishes, you know, lots of people want to make sure that they're all done after every meal, and some people say, you know, particularly folks who live on their own may leave it for another day till they get a whole sink full or a whole dishwasher full. So clutter is not really definable, just like the word normal. What is normal? It just doesn't really exist. We have some ideas, but we don't know. But, you know, is clutter, well, yeah, we gather things or we have too many things, whatever. And when it becomes a problem, that's when the issues start arising.
Now, in my research that I did before the show, there's almost 5,000 storage units across this country now. That's a very recent phenomenon, and especially in the last 10 years, these things are popping up everywhere. And for various reasons, like people go through you know, a divorce, a downsizing, a retirement, illness or disability, a disaster, and they need somewhere to put their stuff. It's out of sight, out of mind. But it's piling up. Just because it's out of your house, you're probably going to start filling that space now with more stuff.
Well, it's interesting because in the last 30 years or 40 years, our houses, the average house size has doubled, and the number of people in those houses has halved. So we have 4 times as much space per person in our homes on average. And I'm wondering if we don't need bigger houses to handle all the stuff that we've accumulated.
Isn't that interesting? And at the same time, in this country, in our 3 major cities, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, almost 55% of people are living in condos now rather than single-family dwellings. So we are downsizing, but we're not getting rid of our stuff. Our stuff is still, you know, piling up. So let's talk about some of the key life changes that might sort of trigger some of these clutter issues, or perhaps even hoarding, or even obsessive compulsive cleaning. For example, Earl, when somebody, a divorce happens, that's a key life moment. A blended family coming together is also a key life moment. These things are triggers for a lot of emotional issues as well. So having to part with your things or downsize your things can be very, very difficult for people and create a lot of anxiety.
I think what we notice most is that key life events are accompanied by stresses that make it difficult for people to really pay attention to ordering their space. So some people respond to that by over-ordering so that everything has to be absolutely perfect in the way that it is. Others just let things go, and sometimes that's a healthy thing if it's for a period of time to allow focus on rest. But sometimes it gets to the point where the problem becomes so big and so overwhelming that they start to settle into that routine, and that becomes their new normal. That becomes the thing that gives them safety, gives them a sense of security. And then when you come in and say, well, you know, we can help you to declutter your life, those stresses having not been dealt with to this point, they say, no, I want to keep those, those things, they're important to me. And they may not even be able to tell you why they're important, but they're important because these stresses still need to be managed, still need to be dealt with in a healthy way, and they simply don't know how.
So if a client came to your Island Integrated Counselling with that type of anxiety issue, how would you help them? What were some of the counseling tools or insights that you'd provide someone who's feeling overwhelmed or very anxious living in their own space?
Well, one thing that we note usually when somebody presents with high anxiety is that they have a need to manage the present moment. And Ian once defined anxiety as living in the future, the fearful future, based on the past, and our job is to get you to the present, rooted in the present, so that you can deal with the present as it is, the reality that it is. So anxiety is usually something that arises because of past events in your life, and it's part of the body's response, part of the mind's response, saying, I want to be safe from that type of event again.
And so there are counseling techniques that can help a person navigate through that and get a little more healthy in terms of their approach to their things?
Absolutely. There are many different approaches. It depends on the person, of course. One of the things that often happens is when somebody's overwhelmed, their brain just can't cope with everything. And so, as Earl said, they'll stick with whatever they know or whatever they feel comfortable with. And comfort when somebody's going through a major loss may be gathering more and more things. They surround themselves with things because they can control those things, they're familiar with them, and they feel safe behind and with those objects. And so then they keep on gathering them. So what we have to do is help them with, for example, grieving. Helping them to realize that even though this has been overwhelming for you, it doesn't mean that you are not capable of being able to manage this and move on. So with some support, with guidance, then they realize they do have the resources, they can grieve, they can move on, they can overcome the tragedy or the crisis or whatever it is that they went through, and then they realize, I don't need all this stuff.
And you're freeing up space in your place, which frees up space for more inner peace.
Totally. I mean, it's amazing when people are willing to really go through their place and clean up. I mean, we all do that. After you know, we've gone through a weekly cleaning, we always feel better. Hey, the kitchen and the washroom are good, and the carpet's been vacuumed or whatever. We always feel better. But look at how people feel after they've done a yard sale or garage sale, and they got rid of all that stuff, and of course they got some money in their pocket too with bonus for them. It's like they feel lighter.
Now what is that? What's being triggered that makes us feel lighter? What is that?
Well, I like to ask the question of people, do you own those things, or do those things own you? Because if it's the second, and I think it is for a lot of people in North America, if we have too many things, too much stuff to deal with, well, we have to manage all of that. We have to know where to do it. We have to maintain it, to take care of it, and not trip over it. And so then it becomes a burden more than just things that we need or really need.
Now, do you think there's a correlation between our increasingly distracted world and distracting world and our need to gather things as we're sort of losing connection with community, with each other? Is there any correlation to that? Like, we're really changing very, very rapidly here with technology over the last 20 years or so. And are these storage units popping up because we're all sort of losing connection?
Well, I think that there's a number of factors. That is one of the factors that we look to, but ultimately it comes down to what is the triggering factor for the anxiety, because this does arise out of anxiety Quite often that anxiety is trauma. And sometimes that trauma is trauma that the person doesn't even have a real memory of. So this is why I know that a lot of people ask, well, how can I help the person who is a hoarder? How can I help my mom or my aunt or my best friend whose home I can't even get into because it's so cluttered? And the fact is, you really can't, other than to be supportive and to be loving and to be accepting. That's where connection does come in. And so if you fail to maintain that connection just because the person is behaving oddly, then you really can't help them. But if you maintain that connection, give them a reason to get out of their space so that they can experience something outside of their day-to-day experience, that is very helpful for the person with anxiety of any description.
It's meeting them where they're at.
It's meeting them where they're at in the present, not in the fearful past and not in the catastrophic future. It's meeting them at the place that they're at so that they can make the choice to deal with the anxiety.
And in your clinical work, has there been good success in counseling people who might have a clutter problem or verging on a hoarding problem? Has there been, what's the success rate for that, to try and turn that around? Or is that really a chronic condition that's very difficult to tackle?
There's so many different circumstances and situations that people are in. So to say, yes, we have an 80% success rate, it's really not fair. But when people get to the core issues, when they actually get to what it is that's going on, and I had a client not long ago, we were able to go back to the Second World War, to history that they were carrying around, where her father had been imprisoned by the Gestapo, by the Nazi regime, and tortured, and finally was released, came to Canada, and were dirt poor, just had nothing to go on. And so the trauma from that has continued on from generation to generation. So once I helped to realize that this shame you're carrying around, this feeling awful, is not your doing or making. You're just simply transmitting something that was given to you by your father in this case. Once she realized that, then she felt free to then live her own life and leave that in the past where it belonged. So then she was able to move forward. In her case, it was so much of a minimalist situation, the opposite of hoarding. She had almost nothing in her house, almost nothing. She'd done nothing to it since she moved into it years ago. So then she was able to start investing in her home, to paint the walls, to start figuring out what she wants for floor coverings, to actually do something positive for her life.
Wow. Was it, in a case like that, is that the individual doesn't feel deserving of these comforts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and there's something wrong with her. And that's what trauma does, is it often, it immobilizes. I'm talking about shame, which says there's something wrong with me, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not enough of some kind or another, compared to guilt, which says I messed up, I did something I shouldn't have done. Guilt we can learn from and grow on, but when trauma tends to take us to shame, which can show up in so many different ways, whether it be an eating disorder, whether it be hoarding, whether it be a gambling or some other kind of addiction, whatever it turns out to be, or high control issues such as somebody wanting to make sure that their house is absolutely pristine, there's never any speck of dust anywhere. That obsessive compulsive is usually what it's called. Whatever those are, it's coming from some place where I'm not feeling secure enough. So if I pile all kinds of stuff around my place, I'm surrounded by that. But as you mentioned earlier, disconnection is what occurs, whether I'm trying to be a perfectionist or whether I'm a hoarder or anything in between. I'm disconnected from you, from my friends, from other people, from belonging in society. And so we have to help them to reconnect to themselves and to others.
And it has to start with yourself, that connection to
yourself,
or
because really when they come to counseling, what they're doing is they're connecting, hopefully connecting with a therapist.
Right.
And so there's a relationship building process that goes on there if it's more than just one session. You can't do one thing without the other. They're all interlinked. We are individuals, but we can't thrive unless we're connected to other people too. So Do we work on ourselves or do we work on relationships? Yes.
Now, what about those that say, I work better in a cluttered environment. Clutter inspires me. Nothing wrong with that?
And that's really what you have to figure out when you're talking about clutter. Are you talking about where your life is negatively impacted as a result, or are you talking about something where you are functioning at a high level and it is an aesthetic problem for other people? And this is one of the things that we have to identify when we're talking about something like hoarding. Is the person safe? That's our first question. You know, is there a fire hazard? Is there a risk that they could not get out in a fire? Is there a risk that somebody could not get in to save them? Once it reaches that level, that's a very difficult situation. And this is one of the complexities of an agency like ours, because when we are dealing with people, because we take people wherever they are financially, wherever their ability to pay is, we very often are taking people that would have sought help 20 years ago, 30 years ago even, but they couldn't afford it. And then they discover that our agency doesn't turn people away because of finances. They come to us and they present with a very serious set of mental health conditions. And so when we have somebody that is dealing with something, high anxiety, hoarding, and that sort of thing, we have to triage. We have to consider, you know, are they safe? Are they going to be in trouble if there's a fire or something like that? And then we start to just assist them where they're at right now. And where they're at right now is they are very comfortable in this space. How can we encourage them to get out of the house more? How can we encourage them to explore life, develop relationships? We have three basic psychological needs. We have the need for autonomy, to be able to make our own decisions. We have the need for competence, the ability to be equipped and able to do the things that we decide to do. And we have the relational needs, where we have a need to be able to function in society so that we can provide support to others and we can receive support from others. If we can move a person to that, then that's the priority. It's not necessarily to help them to have a clean desk. It's to make sure that they are safe and that they are flourishing psychologically and socially.
It's a good thing, because if I had to have a clear desk in order to work for the agency, I wouldn't be.
Yes, you would.
Earl says you can.
Okay.
Okay, let it pile up, Ian. Now, what about somebody who is sort of OCD, like, you know, very obsessively, compulsively cleaning, you know, making sure there's no clutter anywhere, no dirt, nothing. What's going on psychologically or emotionally with that?
If they have to have it so good outside, I like to know what's going on inside. And usually they don't know. They just know they're in distress, or they're not happy, or their spouse is unhappy because, of course, they're always climbing down their throats about anything that might be out of order. And so the big task is to say, all right, so who's at home? Who is it that you are living out of? And if they don't really know what's going on, then our job is to go and check in. It's a bit like, all right, have you gone down to somebody's basement that's got all kinds of spider webs, it's really not used for anything, and you go, how much do I really want to go in there?
Without a big boot to get the spiders.
The spiders and a broom to take down the webs and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes we want to avoid all that. And of course, the busy world that we have and all the electronics, that kind of stuff, will keep us very occupied, and we have to take sleeping pills in order to go to sleep because our minds are so occupied. Well, to declutter in there means to say, hey, you're a human being. aren't you worthy of life? And sometimes people think, that they really don't deserve that, going back to the shame thing. Once they are able to say, well, maybe I do need to live and to live life more fulfilling life, then we can go and do some investigation, helping them to appreciate themselves, to love themselves more. And then when they're able to identify that they're okay, that they are enough, then all this stuff doesn't have to take place the way they've been doing it.
Something else to keep in mind, a lot of your listeners, they will be members of a family where there is somebody in the home who has anxiety, who insists on things being done exactly right, and they're wondering, well, why are they trying to run my life? Why are they demanding that I make all these changes? They're not trying to run your life. They're trying to run their own. They're trying to organize their world in a way that it's predictable and that they can feel safe in it. So once we start to realize, hey, it's not about them trying to manage how I behave, it's about how they receive their world so that they are not even more anxious, they're not even more distressed, then we can have compassion. And we can start to say, this is something that I can help with. Where you might, for example, have problems with always picking up the dishes and putting them right into the dishwasher. When you realize that it's important for their feeling of wellness that you do that, it's something that you can do out of the generosity of your heart rather than out of resentment, feeling that somehow or other you're being made and compelled to do something. And if we approach people who have issues like OCD in that way, with that generosity of spirit, we can help them to overcome that. It's not just a counselor's role, it's the entire community having that attitude.
I like that, the entire community. Now, what if in a household there's someone who's prone to hoarding and somebody who is prone to be a neat freak?
Oh boy.
How does that work? Can that work?
That's why we have couples counseling.
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Because then they drive each other crazy,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it would.
Even though they may be both suffering from something very similar.
Yes.
And it isn't just about, it's so easy for us to identify behaviors and say, this is good, that's bad. We do that too much in the school system too. It's not about the behaviors. The behaviors are simply showing or revealing something that's going on inside. And so using compassion, being curious to go deeper with what it is that's going on, then people come to understand, oh, that's why you're doing it that way. And when they have that understanding, when they grasp it, then they realize they've got more in common with the person than they do opposed to them. And so it shows up differently on the outside, but it's not so different on the inside for most of us.
Yeah.
The quest for order is part of the quest for mental wellness. It really doesn't matter what your mental health condition is, you are going to have a quest for order. And so when you are opposed in that, when there's conflict in the home because of your quest for order, then you have two choices. You can give up your quest for order and perhaps abandon that path to wellness that you intuitively feel that you need to have, or there will be conflict. So much of the conflict that we see in the counseling room really comes down to somebody approaching their spouse or their child or their great aunt or whoever it is, with the sense that somehow they should behave normally. And as Ian said, what is normal?
Yeah.
We instead need to have that compassionate frame that we approach all of our relationships with.
Beautiful. Now at Island Integrated Counselling, what is the integrated component of that title?
Well, integrated is referring to the fact that there is no one pathway to mental wellness. There is no one approach. In fact, we have a total of 8 different counselors, and I don't think we have any 2 that have pursued the same track for their training, the same track for how they counsel. We have very, very different strengths and very, very different areas that we can assist people. The integrated part then is not only that variety and that curiosity that we engender in each other. Just this morning we had one of our students who gave a very impressive and very helpful mindfulness teaching session for us old folk was still very, very helpful and very, very useful. Having that curiosity, having that appreciation for the full range of approaches, and having that desire to continue always finding a better way, a better understanding, and then bringing in what we lack, bringing that in from whoever has that ability to meet that need.
Wonderful.
All of that.
And Ian, it's the fee structure is what the client can pay. Is that it? And you're subsidized?
Yes. And we certainly do encourage as much as possible for people to give as much as they can, because obviously we can't survive on thin air. And we don't want people to starve to death. This is not a very good integrated approach.
No, integrated starving doesn't work.
So we end up having clients be seen by our students more if they can't afford more of the full rate. And if they can, then they can see a more experienced therapist. Although sometimes I think students can do very well with some of the folks that can afford more, and sometimes do. So it depends. We have a wonderful woman who does our intake, and she's very good at sorting out where they need to go.
Very good. Well, our time is up here, gentlemen. It flew by very quickly. The conversation wasn't cluttered.
No.
So thank you so much for joining us tonight and helping our viewers understand a little more about clutter and OCD and perhaps hoarding even, and the wonderful resources that you have available there at Island Integrated Counselling. Thank you so much for helping to strengthen the connections here in our community through the work you do.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And we'll see you next time on Coast Connections. Thank you very much and have an uncluttered life.